Have you ever waited for a message and felt the hours drag on? Maybe it was a text that didn't arrive, an email delayed, or a letter in the post that came later than promised. Now imagine that delay stretched not by hours or days, but by months. Imagine writing words on paper, sealing them, and then releasing them into a world where roads were uncertain, travelers slow, and dangers countless. For centuries, this was the reality. Sending a letter was never a guarantee of speed, and often not even a guarantee of delivery at all. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Tonight, we'll step into the fragile world of communication before the modern age, when every message risked being lost to the road. And if you enjoy these calm journeys into forgotten struggles, you may gently subscribe so the next story arrives to you more surely than many letters once did. Letters were more than paper and ink. They carried voices across distance, binding families, merchants, and rulers together. Yet those voices often faltered on the journey. The act of sending a letter was an act of trust. Trust in strangers, trust in horses, trust in weather, trust in luck. Have you ever handed something precious to another person and felt a flicker of unease, wondering if it would reach its destination safely? That unease lived in every sender's heart. The slowness began with the road itself. Distances stretched endlessly when walked or ridden. A single day's journey might cover only 20 miles on foot, or 30 to 40 with a good horse. A letter traveling hundreds of miles was bound to take weeks, and if mountains, rivers, or forests blocked the way, the delay grew longer still. The map between sender and receiver was not smooth lines. It was obstacles piled one after another. Messengers bore the burden. Some were hired specifically to carry letters, racing from town to town. Others were travelers who agreed to deliver messages along their route. Both faced hardships. Rain slowed them, snow stopped them, illness delayed them. Horses went lame, wagons broke, paths vanished into mud. Each setback added hours that stretched into days. Then there was the risk of loss. Letters were small, easily damaged. A careless hand might drop one into a puddle. A thief might seize a satchel, tossing aside what seemed worthless. Fire, water, and accident destroyed countless messages before they ever arrived. Have you ever lost a message in your phone or computer and felt the frustration of it vanishing? Imagine that loss permanent, your words erased not by error, but by the road itself. Even when letters reached the right town, they did not always reach the right person. Addresses were vague, names common, handwriting unclear. A letter might sit for weeks in the wrong hands, waiting for someone to recognize the intended recipient. Sometimes they never did. The sender waited endlessly, unaware their words had stopped just short of their destination. The world moved slower, and so did expectations. People wrote knowing their letters might arrive long after the moment had passed. A merchant's instructions could be outdated by the time they reached his partner. A parent's blessing might arrive after a child had already made their choice. News of sickness, marriage, or death often came too late to act upon. Letters carried voices, but not always in time. And yet, despite the risks, people continued to write. Why? Because even the chance of a letter arriving was better than silence. A letter that took months still carried comfort. Words once written traveled farther than footsteps ever could, even if their journey was slow and uncertain. So why could letters take months to arrive and sometimes never did, because they were fragile things in a harsh world. They relied on roads that crumbled, on travelers who faltered, on strangers who might not care. They were slowed by distance, delayed by weather, and lost to countless accidents. And yet their very fragility made them precious, each one a reminder of how much effort it once took simply to keep voices alive across distance. Have you ever trusted someone else to deliver something important, only to spend the waiting time wondering whether they would succeed? That was the life of those who wrote letters centuries ago. Sending a message was not simply sealing paper and sending it away. It was entrusting your words, and sometimes your fate, to a messenger who had to carry them across dangerous miles. The burden of communication rested heavily on their shoulders. Messengers came in many forms. Some were professionals hired by rulers or merchants, trained to ride fast and endure hardship. Others were ordinary travelers, given letters to carry because they happened to be going in the right direction. Both faced the same challenge: keeping fragile sheets of paper safe through wind, rain, and endless miles of rough road. The task was never light. Messengers carried more than paper. They carried expectations. A merchant awaited news of prices. A family awaited word from afar. A ruler awaited instructions. A single delay might cost fortunes or alter decisions. Have you ever felt the weight of responsibility pressing on you, even for a small task? For messengers, that weight was constant, carried every step of the journey. Roads made the burden heavier. Mud slowed wheels, stones bruised hooves, streams rose into floods. A messenger might set out in sunlight only to be trapped by storms before dusk. Horses stumbled, carts broke, feet ached with blisters. Every mile resisted them, and every mile tested their determination to push onward with the letter still safe in hand. There was danger from people as well. Roads were lonely, and lonely roads tempted thieves. A messenger with satchels might be mistaken for a wealthy trader. Even if caught, the letter itself was rarely valuable to strangers, but the delay was devastating to the sender. Some messengers hid letters deep inside clothing. Others carried decoys, stuffing bags with blank sheets, so thieves ignored the real message hidden elsewhere. Illness posed another risk. A messenger struck by fever could do little but collapse by the roadside, the letter useless until another passerby discovered it. Some messages never traveled farther than the hand of the fallen, lost forever to weather or time. Those who hired messengers knew this, and accepted the risk as part of the fragile chain that linked distant lives. Messengers themselves often felt conflicted. The job was tiring, the pay sometimes small, the dangers great. Yet it also gave purpose. To be trusted with a letter meant being trusted with a piece of someone's life. That sense of duty carried them through nights on the road, storms in the hills, and endless stretches of solitude. Have you ever done a task not for the reward, but because someone trusted you to see it through? That quiet pride echoed in the hearts of many who carried letters. Travelers who were asked to deliver letters often agreed out of kindness, obligation, or chance. A merchant might add a neighbor's message to his satchel. A soldier returning home might carry words from comrades to their families. These informal messengers expanded the network of communication, yet also added uncertainty. They were not bound to deliver quickly nor always carefully. A message might wait days before being passed along, adding delay upon delay. Despite every burden, messengers remained the lifeblood of correspondence. Without them, words would never leave the town where they were written. They carried more than parchment. They carried hope, trust, and connection. And though many faltered, many more persevered, bringing letters safely across landscapes that seemed determined to resist them. So why did letters take so long to arrive? Because their journey was not only across distance, but across human endurance. Each one depended on the strength, honesty, and resilience of the messenger who bore it. And while some messages vanished, many others survived precisely because those weary feet, those sore hands, and those determined hearts refused to let them be lost. Have you ever tried walking along a muddy path and felt how every step dragged you down? Imagine carrying not only yourself, but also the weight of another person's voice sealed in a letter. The condition of the roads themselves was one of the greatest reasons why messages traveled slowly, and why some never arrived at all. Roads were rarely smooth. Dirt tracks wound through forests, across fields, over hills. In dry seasons they cracked and turned to dust. In wet seasons they dissolved into rivers of mud. Wagons sank to their axles, horses stumbled, and messengers trudged slowly, each mile harder than the last. A path that seemed short on a map could stretch into a full day's work once weather weighed it down. Bridges were scarce, and those that existed often fragile. A sudden flood could sweep one away, forcing travelers to ford rivers by foot or find long detours. A messenger delayed by a river might lose days waiting for water to recede, the letter still sealed but useless until it moved forward again. Have you ever stood at a closed road sign, frustrated that the way ahead was blocked? For them there was no sign, only the cruel surprise of a crossing that no longer existed. Mountains slowed letters even more. Narrow passes, steep climbs, sudden storms, these were obstacles few dared to face quickly. A letter carried across mountains could take weeks, even if the distance seemed short on paper. Snow lingered on high paths long after towns below had warmed, trapping messengers or forcing them to turn back. Each failed attempt stretched time, making the letter's arrival uncertain. Even plains brought challenges. Open lands offered no shelter from sun, wind, or storm. Dust blinded eyes, rain soaked parchment, heat exhausted both man and beast. Long stretches without rest drained strength, slowing pace until even flat ground became a burden. Have you ever walked under a hot sun with no shade in sight? That was the daily trial of many who carried letters across open land. Travelers also faced danger from the roads themselves. Ruts broke wheels, stones bruised hooves, sudden holes twisted ankles. Every stumble slowed the journey further. A horse lounged on the road might end the trip altogether, leaving a messenger to walk, the letter delayed by days or weeks. In towns, roads grew crowded. Markets spilled into streets, wagons clogged pathways, animals jostled through. A messenger threading through the chaos lost time at every step. Progress slowed not by distance, but by density, as people pressed shoulder to shoulder, unaware or unconcerned about the urgency of the message being carried. The fragility of the letter itself added to the burden. Rain seeped through satchels, mud splashed across folded paper, careless hands tore seals. To protect them, messengers wrapped letters in cloth or tucked them deep inside pouches. Still, the road's hazards left their marks. Many letters arrived smudged, wrinkled, or torn, evidence of the rough miles they had endured. So why did letters take months to arrive? Because the road fought every step. Mud, stone, water, mountain, and storm turned short distances into long struggles. The messenger could only move as fast as the land allowed, and the land rarely allowed much speed at all. Have you ever planned something simple, like a short trip or errand, only to have the weather change everything? A sudden storm, heavy snow, or strong wind can stop us even today. For messengers carrying letters centuries ago, weather was one of the most relentless enemies. It slowed their steps, soaked their satchels, and sometimes erased words before they ever reached the reader. Rain was the most common threat. Dirt roads dissolved into mud, slowing horses and wagons until every mile felt doubled. Shoes clogged. With wet earth, carts slid sideways, and animals refused to move. A letter that might have taken a day to deliver could stretch into 3 or 4, the messenger slogging forward with each step heavier than the last. Worse still, rain soaked through bags, blurring ink. Writers poured thought into words, but a single downpour could wash them into smears. Many recipients unfolded letters only to find faint stains where sentences had once lived. Snow was harsher still. It buried roads, hid landmarks, and drained strength. Messengers trudged waist-deep or turned back entirely. A letter written in autumn might not arrive until spring, delayed by months of impassable passes and frozen rivers. Families waited anxiously, not knowing whether silence meant disaster or simply snow. Have you ever felt frustration at a delayed delivery in winter? For them, it was expected, inevitable, and sometimes permanent. Wind created dangers less visible, but equally real. Strong gusts drove rain sideways, lifted roofs from wagons, and chilled travelers to the bone. Horses balked, refusing to press against it. Messengers bent forward, struggling for balance, every step a battle. Letters folded carefully inside. Bags crumpled under the weight of damp, wind-driven storms. Even if the messenger survived the gale, the words arrived wrinkled and weary, like the journey itself. Heat slowed letters too. Roads baked hard, air shimmered, water ran short. Messengers weakened, animals tired, and pace dwindled. Sweat-soaked paper, salt-staining corners. Ink faded under harsh sun, letters arriving faint, their voices weakened. In some lands, parchment curled, seals cracked, and words nearly vanished before they reached the reader. Fog added a different burden, confusion. Landmarks vanished into white haze, roads blurred, footsteps muffled. Messengers wandered in circles, guessing at turns, delaying letters by hours or days. A wrong step in fog could lead into marshes, forests, or dangerous slopes. A letter's delay was not always from storms, but from the silence of thick air that swallowed direction. Weather also wore down morale. Imagine walking through rain day after day, each morning knowing you would be wet again before noon. Messengers endured this endlessly. Some grew ill, collapsing along roadsides. Letters stalled until another took them up. Others persevered, but at a slower pace, every mile costing more effort than the last. So why did letters take months to arrive? Because the sky itself fought against them. Rain blurred words, snow blocked paths, wind bent travelers backward, heat drained strength, fog erased the world. No matter how determined the messenger, weather dictated the journey. turning every letter into a fragile hope carried against the power of the elements. Have you ever been caught in a busy town and realized that simply moving from one side to the other took far longer than you expected? Streets crowded with carts, markets spilling over with noise, and strangers stopping you at every turn. For messengers carrying letters, towns themselves often caused as much delay as the miles of road between them. Letters might reach a town quickly, but inside the walls time seemed to slow. Messengers had to find the right recipient, a task harder than it sounds. Addresses were vague, houses unnumbered, and names common. A letter might be marked only with a person's name and town, leaving the messenger to ask endlessly, "Do you know where this person lives?" Each wrong door cost hours. Markets clogged streets with wagons and animals. A messenger threading through narrow alleys lost precious time, waiting for carts to move or herds to pass. Dust and noise surrounded them, and sometimes letters were jostled or bent in the crush. Have you ever been late because of traffic, trapped with no way to move faster? For messengers, every busy market was traffic of the slowest kind. Delays also came from officials. In some places, letters were inspected, recorded, or taxed before being handed over. Each step meant more waiting, more chances for paper to be misplaced. Messengers lined up with others, watching the sun sink while their letters sat in someone else's hands. Even after reaching the right household, letters were not always delivered immediately. If the recipient was absent, away at work in another town, or traveling, the letter might wait days before being passed along. Sometimes neighbors held it, promising to deliver later. Sometimes it was forgotten entirely, left to gather dust until rediscovered. Taverns and inns added further delays. Messengers, exhausted, often stopped for rest. While sleeping or waiting for food, letters paused with them. Some even left bundles of letters at inns, asking innkeepers to hand them to the right people. This trust sometimes worked, but other times letters lingered for weeks, misplaced in drawers, or left behind by mistake. Towns also tempted distraction. Messengers, human like anyone else, might be drawn into conversation, rest, or trade. A letter that should have moved on quickly sometimes waited because its carrier lingered. Have you ever put off a task because the setting offered too many diversions? That was another quiet reason why letters slowed in towns. Despite all these obstacles, towns remained essential. They were gathering points, places where letters were exchanged, sorted, or redirected. A messenger passing through a village might carry not only their own letter, but pick up others left by travelers before them. The network of communication, fragile as it was, depended on these stops, even if they stretched journeys into months. Even now, as you listen to this story, you can imagine those tired messengers weaving through crowded markets, knocking on doors, asking strangers for names. And if you enjoy these quiet glimpses into forgotten struggles, you may gently subscribe so each new story reaches you more faithfully than many letters once did. So why did letters take so long? Because towns, though full of people, could be as confusing as wilderness. Streets tangled, names repeated, officials delayed, and distractions tempted. Letters might travel fast on the road, only to lose days within the very places meant to receive them. Have you ever dropped something small and precious only to watch it vanish beyond recovery? For centuries, letters faced the same fate, not by a single careless hand, but by the countless accidents of long journeys. Each mile held the chance for a message to be lost forever, swallowed by mud, fire, water, or simply by the clumsiness of chance. Horses stumbled, throwing riders and spilling satchels. A single fall could scatter letters across a field, the wind snatching them into ditches or streams. Messengers scrambled to gather them, but not all were found. Some were trampled, some soaked, some carried away by water. Imagine a carefully written confession, a business agreement, or a farewell letter, vanishing in seconds because a hoof struck the ground too sharply. Fires claimed many more. Inns, stables, and wagons were often lit by open flame. One spark on a bundle of letters reduced them to ash before anyone could intervene. Merchants mourned contracts that never reached partners. Families wept for words they would never read. To write a letter was to risk fire, always lurking near hearths and torches. Water was an even greater thief. Letters traveled by boat as well as road, packed into barrels or satchels for river crossings. Boats capsized in storms, cargo tumbled into the current, and paper soaked through. Some were dried and salvaged, though blurred beyond reading. Others dissolved entirely, ink bleeding into water, until only pale scraps remained. Have you ever left paper in the rain and watched the words fade? Multiply that by countless storms, and you know the fate of many letters. Even simple carelessness played its role. A messenger leaned too far, dropping a letter into a crack. A bag split, spilling its contents unnoticed. A page slipped between boards of a wagon and was lost until found months later by accident, if at all. Each small mistake left behind a trail of silence, the sender waiting endlessly, never knowing the reason their words never arrived. Animals added to the risk. Dogs tore satchels, rats gnawed corners, insects ate through parchment. Letters stored for too long in damp rooms grew moldy, unreadable. A message might survive the road, only to rot quietly in storage before reaching its reader. Accidents were cruel because they were unexpected. Roads and weather could be anticipated, but who could predict a dropped satchel, a sudden fire, or a careless moment? Letters traveled under constant threat, and each survivor was almost miraculous. So why did letters sometimes never arrive? Because the world was full of accidents waiting to claim them. A single stumble, spark, wave, or tear was enough to erase words that might have mattered deeply. And while many letters endured, countless others vanished into silence, leaving behind only the mystery of their absence. Have you ever underestimated how far away something really was? Perhaps you set out thinking the trip would take only a short while, only to discover hours had passed, and you were still not close. For letters, distance was the greatest obstacle of all. No matter how careful the messenger, how favorable the weather, or how safe the roads, sheer distance stretched words thin, delaying them into weeks or months. Imagine a merchant in one town writing to his partner in another, hundreds of miles away. His words might take a single day to write, but weeks to walk. Messengers averaged 20 miles on foot per day if conditions were good. Horses carried letters faster, but even then, riders needed rest, animals required food, and accidents slowed the journey. A letter traveling 400 miles might take nearly a month, even under the best circumstances. Crossing borders added to the delay. Different regions had different laws, tolls, and checkpoints. Messengers stopped to pay fees or explain their purpose, each pause stretching time. Some waited days for clearance, the letter sealed inside their bag, but going nowhere. Have you ever been held up at a checkpoint or waiting in a long line? That frustration was multiplied by weeks when letters had to cross territories. Mountains multiplied distance by winding roads. A straight path on a map turned into days of climbing and descending. Snow or storms blocked passes, adding weeks of waiting. Messengers sometimes turned back, forced to try a longer but safer route. A letter that should have traveled in a month might arrive in 3, slowed by the stubbornness of stone. Seas added even greater burdens. Letters sent across water were at the mercy of ships, tides, and winds. A voyage that should have taken days stretched into weeks when storms blew ships off course. Some letters circled entire coasts before reaching the right harbor. Others never arrived, lost with the ships themselves. Families waited, merchants fretted, and silence deepened. Even within a single country, distance wore down letters. Villages isolated by forests or marshes might not see a messenger for months. Letters piled up in larger towns, waiting for someone willing to brave the long road to deliver them. Recipients learned to expect silence, not because they were forgotten, but because distance itself was unrelenting. The human body, too, set limits. Messengers grew weary, animals weakened, and both required rest. No one could run endlessly, no matter the urgency of the words carried. Every stop, to eat, to drink, to sleep, slowed the letter further. Distance was not measured only in miles, but in human endurance stretched across endless paths. So why did letters take months to arrive? Because distance refused to shrink. No clever trick erased miles, no shortcut bridged mountains or seas without cost. Letters traveled only as fast as feet, hooves, or sails could carry them, and all of those were bound to the stubborn pace of distance itself. Have you ever given something important to someone you didn't really know, hoping they would carry it safely to where it needed to go? For centuries, most letters depended on strangers. Without official postal systems in many regions, messages often traveled hand to hand, passed between people whose only bond was circumstance. This reliance on strangers both kept communication alive and made it fragile, for trust could so easily be broken. A merchant might hand his letter to another trader heading in the same direction. A soldier might ask a traveler to carry a note to his family. Families pressed folded pages into the hands of riders, begging them to deliver the words along their journey. Each of these moments carried risk. Would the stranger keep the promise or lose interest once the road grew hard? Some strangers meant well but were careless. They tucked letters deep in their packs, only to forget them. A paper might stay folded in a bag for weeks before being remembered and passed along. Others delayed by choice, stopping in towns, resting, or waiting for better conditions. The letters slowed with them, its urgency lost in their own priorities. Have you ever postponed a small task, telling yourself you'd do it later, only to realize weeks had passed? That same delay happened endlessly with letters. Others abandoned letters entirely. A messenger tired of carrying extra weight might discard them by the roadside. Some feared being questioned at checkpoints and destroyed letters to avoid suspicion. Others simply lost them, dropped, misplaced, or stolen by accident. The sender's trust dissolved into silence, and the recipient never knew the words had even begun their journey. Trusting strangers also raised dangers of secrecy. Letters could be opened, read, or copied before delivery. Merchants worried about trade secrets falling into rivals' hands. Families feared personal words becoming gossip. Even when letters arrived, there was no guarantee they had not been read along the way. A broken seal or faint crease told the story of curiosity that had tampered with privacy. Yet without strangers, letters would have traveled nowhere. The world was too wide, the roads too long. Messengers could not be everywhere, and not everyone could afford professionals. Strangers kept words moving, one hand to another, until eventually, sometimes, they reached their destination. This system worked because of fragile trust. People believed enough in kindness, obligation, or profit to hand over messages. And often, strangers proved worthy. Letters did arrive, though slower than hoped. Every successful delivery strengthened the fragile chain, encouraging more people to trust again. So why did letters take months or fail altogether? Because they depended on strangers who carried them with mixed care, mixed honesty, and mixed determination. Every handoff was a gamble, and sometimes the gamble failed. But in a world without faster choices, trusting strangers was the only path words could take. Have you ever waited for news so long that you began to doubt whether it would ever arrive? That silence was perhaps the cruelest part of old correspondence. Letters were fragile enough to be delayed, damaged, or lost, but the worst was when nothing came at all, when the sender believed their words were carried forward, and the receiver waited endlessly, unaware that silence itself was the only message. Families knew this silence too well. A parent wrote to a child in another town. Weeks passed, then months. No answer came. Was the child too busy to reply? Had the letter been lost? Or had something worse happened? The uncertainty gnawed, for silence could mean anything, and in that absence of truth, the mind filled with worry. Merchants faced silence with equal frustration. A deal depended on a quick reply, but weeks turned to months with no word. Should they act without confirmation, risking failure, or wait longer, risking loss of opportunity? The lack of response was not simply inconvenient, it was dangerous. Entire trades faltered because a letter never arrived. Messengers themselves often carried the burden of silence. Some knew the letter they lost had been important. They carried guilt, imagining the faces of those waiting for words that would never come. Others shrugged it off, for accidents were common. But no matter the cause, silence always spread wider than the paper it erased. Silence also came from fear. Not all letters were written freely. Some people hesitated to put thoughts on paper, worried about others reading them. A letter unwritten became a silence of its own, leaving distance unbridged. Words unspoken piled up like letters never sent, and relationships suffered quietly for lack of communication. The pain of silence lay in its uncertainty. If a letter was burned, at least there was an answer. If a messenger fell, at least there was a reason. But when nothing happened, when days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still no reply, the silence grew unbearable. It left people questioning themselves as much as the world. Did they forget me? Did they not care? Or was my letter lost forever? Even now, as you listen to this poem history, you can feel the weight of that waiting, the quiet gap between words written and words received. And if you would like to keep wandering into stories like this, you may gently subscribe, so each new history reaches you without silence standing in the way. So why did silence replace letters? Because so many things could erase them: weather, distance, strangers, or pure chance. And once a letter was gone, it left behind nothing but waiting, a pause that stretched too long, a space where words should have been but never arrived. Have you ever held something fragile and realized its worth was greater precisely because it had endured? That was the fate of every letter that arrived safely after weeks or months of risk. Letters were not taken for granted, for each one that reached its destination was a victory against distance, weather, accidents, and silence. When a letter finally landed in the right hands, it carried more than ink. It carried proof that the sender still thought of the receiver, proof that miles could be crossed, proof that connection had not broken entirely. In a world where absence was common, the arrival of a letter was cause for relief, sometimes even celebration. Families opened them with care, unfolding pages slowly, as if afraid the words might vanish. Each sentence was read and reread, savored not only for its meaning, but for its survival. Have you ever reread a message because you couldn't quite believe it had arrived? That was the way people clung to letters, their fragility making them treasures. Merchants valued them differently. A letter delivered on time could seal a deal, prevent loss, or save fortunes. For them, the letter was not only connection, but profit. Its safe arrival meant opportunity, proof that despite all delays, communication could still guide business across miles. Even the senders felt triumph when word returned. To know their message had survived brought satisfaction. Their thoughts had traveled beyond their reach, carried by others, and yet still found their mark. The world, wide and resistant, had not silenced them. Their words had walked where they could not. Letters that arrived became keepsakes. People folded and stored them, tied them with string, or placed them in boxes. They were not discarded quickly, for each bore the memory of survival. Families passed them down, proof of bonds stretched across distance. Many of the letters we read today from the past exist because someone once treasured them not as paper, but as living voices. The long delays, the endless risks, the frequent losses, all of these made the safe letter shine brighter. A single page carried more weight than dozens of messages today. Its worth was not only in its content, but in the journey it had endured. So why did letters matter so much, even though they took months to arrive and sometimes never did? Because they proved connection was still possible. Because in a world full of silence and absence, the arrival of words was a miracle of endurance. Because every safe letter was a reminder that distance, no matter how vast, could not entirely break the human desire to reach one another. And so this history closes where letters always hope to end, in the right hands, opened carefully, read slowly, treasured deeply. Fragile words, carried across hostile miles, finally resting where they were meant to be.